You've probably heard wild garage legends before, but few provoke as much disbelief, outrage, and grudging admiration as this one. The story goes that an ordinary backyard tinkerer, working with basic tools and a shoestring budget, outmaneuvered the entire Detroit powertrain economy. For the price of a fast food dinner, he supposedly walked away with what others pay thousands for, leaving a major manufacturer's system exposed in the process. The tale has circulated for years, morphing, mutating, and confusing diesel with something far more explosive. But the core of it stays the same. One man cracked a loophole Detroit never thought to lock: the heist of crate engines. Picture this. It is a Saturday morning and you walk into a local rental agency. Let's say it rhymes with New-Haul. You slap down a $20 bill plus a deposit, sign the paperwork for a beat-up Chevy Express cargo van, and drive it off the lot. You have the vehicle for exactly 24 hours. When you return it the next day, the clerk walks around the perimeter, checks the tires, verifies the fuel level, and hands you your receipt. You walk away free and clear. To the rental agency, nothing has changed. The van looks the same, it sounds roughly the same, it starts, it runs, and it drives. But you didn't just use that van to move a couch. You just pulled off the most audacious mechanical heist of the modern era. You stole the beating heart of the vehicle, replaced it with a weaker organ, and the victim didn't even notice. We call this individual the Tinkerer. And what he accomplished wasn't just simple theft. It was a landmark case of what forensic analysts call component arbitrage. See, General Motors and the performance aftermarket have spent decades building a fortress around the crate engine economy. If you want a high-performance iron block V8 for your project car, you are expected to pay the Detroit premium. You are supposed to shell out $5,000, maybe $7,000 for a remanufactured unit. That is the regulated market. That is how the system is designed to work. The tinkerer looked at that price tag and realized that the exact same asset, the holy grail of budget engine builds, was sitting inside a fleet vehicle that costs $19.95 a day. By exploiting a massive blind spot in corporate manufacturing strategy, he effectively traded a $40 rental fee for a multi-thousand-dollar powertrain. He didn't just steal an engine, he short-circuited the entire automotive pricing structure. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts, we have to address the title of this legend. If you have browsed automotive forums or old internet threads, you know this story as the $40 diesel swap. That is a misnomer, a myth. There were no diesel engines involved in this operation. This story is about something far more universal and far more critical to American car culture. This is about the General Motors LS platform, specifically the Vortec V8. The internet likely attached the word diesel to the legend because the engine in question was a heavy-duty torque monster, but the hardware was pure gasoline. The genius of this crime wasn't in fuel types, it was in understanding the economics of mass production. The tinkerer saw a financial loophole that billions of dollars of corporate strategy missed. And once you look at the raw numbers, you realize why he took the risk. The economics of displacement arbitrage. To understand why someone would risk a felony for an engine block, you have to understand the artificial economy created by General Motors. We call this the Detroit premium. From a manufacturing standpoint, casting a 6.0-liter engine block costs roughly the same as casting a 4.8-liter block. They are made of the same iron, machined on the same assembly lines, and bolted together with the same hardware. But in the showroom and on the parts counter, those missing 1.2 liters of displacement carry a massive surcharge. GM segments the market based on power, charging thousands more for the capability of the 6.0-liter LQ4 or LY6 variants. The secondary market, the world of drag racers, drifters, and hot rodders, reflects this premium aggressively. If you go to a junkyard or a reputable reseller today to buy a dropout 6.0-liter engine, you are looking at a bill anywhere from $2,100 to $4,500. If you want a remanufactured unit with a warranty, that price tag easily climbs over $5,000. The 6.0-liter is the gold standard for budget builders because of its 4-inch cylinder bore and robust iron construction, which makes it perfect for adding turbochargers and making 4-digit horsepower. It is the asset everyone wants. Now look at the tinkerer's ledger. He didn't pay market price. He paid the rental rate. Major rental agencies advertise cargo vans starting at $19.95 a day. Even if you factor in taxes, insurance, and the mileage to drive the van to your garage and back, the total acquisition cost for the donor vehicle is somewhere between $40 and $100. Do the math on that arbitrage. By swapping the engines, the tinkerer achieved a cost reduction efficiency of over 97%. He secured a multi-thousand-dollar performance asset for the price of a modest dinner for two. This massive disparity creates what forensic accountants call value capture. The tinkerer didn't just steal a part. He exploited the gap between the fixed, low-overhead cost of renting a commercial tool and the volatile, high-value market for performance parts. He bypassed the junkyards, the freight shipping costs, and the risk of buying a dud engine from a stranger on the internet. But here is where the brilliance of the scheme really lands. In a traditional theft, the car is gone, the asset is written off. This was different. This was component swirling. The tinkerer owned a 4.8-liter V8, a perfectly functional, reliable, but less valuable engine. By installing his 4.8-liter into the rental van, he ensured the asset remained operational. When he returned the keys, the van started. It idled. It moved under its own power. He didn't leave the rental agency with a broken vehicle. He left them with a downgraded one. He essentially forced the rental company to trade their high-value thoroughbred for his workhorse mule, and he did it without them ever realizing a transaction had taken place. The fleet didn't lose a vehicle. They lost the performance potential hidden inside the cylinders, suffering a silent financial depreciation that wouldn't show up on a balance sheet until years later when the van failed to tow a heavy load, or was sold at auction with the wrong VIN code under the hood. The Universal Soldier architecture. The feasibility of this entire operation rests on a single piece of industrial engineering that builders call the Universal Soldier. We are talking about the General Motors Generation 3 and IV small block platform. This architecture is the single most modular engine family in automotive history, and that modularity is exactly what the tinkerer exploited. General Motors did not design these engines to be theft-proof. They designed them to be profitable. To maximize efficiency, GM engineers utilized a strategy known as artificial segmentation. They created a family of engines, the 4.8-liter, the 5.3, the 6.0, and the 6.2, that are effectively identical twins on the outside, even if they are chemically different on the inside. If you were to crack these engines open, you would find significant differences. The 4.8-liter LR4 operates with a modest 3.780-inch bore and a short stroke, displacing just 293 cubic inches. It is a reliable, entry-level mill. The 6.0-liter LQ4, however, is a different beast entirely. It utilizes a massive 4.000-inch bore and a longer stroke to displace 364 cubic inches. That internal geometry is what creates the torque and the horsepower that tuners crave. But to the assembly line robot, and crucially to the guy holding the wrench in his driveway, these two engines are indistinguishable. The external block dimensions are a carbon copy. This uniformity is the mechanical linchpin of the heist. The motor mount bosses are drilled in the exact same locations. The exhaust ports are identical. Most importantly, the bell housing bolt pattern, the critical interface where the engine mates to the transmission, is the standard Gen 3-4 pattern. This meant that the heavy-duty transmission in the rental van, likely a 4L80E or 6L90E, bolted directly to the tinkerer's smaller 4.8-liter engine without a single adapter plate, spacer, or custom bracket. Think about the implications of that for a second. There was no cutting, there was no welding, there was no custom fabrication. This was not a swap in the traditional hot rodding sense where you were fighting to make non-compliant parts fit. This was a factory-level service procedure. The alternator, the power steering pump, the AC compressor, and the belt tensioners from the heavy-duty 6.0-liter transferred directly over to the 4.8. The wiring harness plugs clicked right into the sensors without modification. It was, for all intents and purposes, like playing with industrial Legos. General Motors inadvertently turned their greatest manufacturing strength into their greatest security liability. By standardizing every bolt hole to save pennies on the assembly line, they created a plug-and-play environment for component theft. Because one bolt fits all, one thief can take all. Once the installation is complete, the deception is visually absolute. Both engines utilize cast iron blocks. Both are shrouded in the same black plastic intake manifolds and serpentine belts. After a few thousand miles of road grime, oil, sweat, and dust settle on the metal, A 4.8 liter looks exactly like a 6.0 liter, unless the rental clerk was carrying a bore scope or crawling underneath to check casting numbers on the back of the block, which they absolutely do not do. The swap is undetectable to the naked eye. The tinkerer relied on the fact that corporate efficiency had made the valuable asset look exactly like the cheap one. The electronic silent failure protocol. Bolting the engine into the chassis was only half the battle. If you know anything about modern cars, you know that the mechanical work is often the easy part. The real nightmare is the electronics. You can physically install a different engine, but if the brain of the car, the engine control unit, rejects the transplant, the dashboard will light up like a Christmas tree, and the rental agency will know something is wrong the moment they turn the key. The genius of this exploit is that the tinkerer didn't just fool the mechanic, he fooled the computer. To understand how this happened, you have to look at how an ECU manages combustion. The computer in that heavy-duty van is programmed with a specific set of volumetric efficiency tables. It expects the lungs of a 6.0-liter engine. It expects a massive gulp of air every time the intake valve opens, and it calculates the fuel injection pulse width based on that expectation. When you drop in a 4.8-liter engine, you have changed the physics. The smaller engine has a shorter stroke and smaller displacement. It physically cannot pull in as much air as the 6.0-liter. So, when the tinkerer starts the van, the computer sprays fuel for a 6.0-liter comma, but the cylinder only holds enough air for a 4.8-liter. In technical terms, this creates a rich condition. The mixture has too much gas and not enough oxygen. In a strictly rigid system, this would immediately trigger a check engine light for a system too rich error. But our systems are not rigid, they are adaptive. This is where the loophole opens. The ECU relies on closed-loop feedback from the oxygen sensors in the exhaust. These sensors sniff the exhaust gas, realize there is unburnt fuel, and send a voltage signal back to the computer, screaming that the mix is too rich. The computer reacts using short-term fuel trims. It immediately starts dialing back the fuel injectors, pulling fuel out of the mix to balance the chemistry. As this correction stabilizes, the data moves to the long-term fuel trims. The computer essentially learns that this engine needs less fuel than the factory map suggests, and it permanently saves that adjustment. General Motors engineers programmed these computers with a massive tolerance band. To account for real-world variables like high-altitude driving, clogged air filters, or bad batches of gasoline, the ECU is allowed to adjust the fuel trim by up to 25% before it decides there is a failure. The difference in fuel demand between the 4.8-liter and the 6.0-liter is significant, but it falls just inside that 25% window. The computer didn't see a crime, it just saw a variation it could handle. It trimmed the fuel, balanced the idle, and kept the check engine light off. There was one potential tripwire: active fuel management or cylinder deactivation. If the van expected to shut down 4 cylinders for highway cruising and the swapped engine lacked the hardware, the system would crash. But by targeting heavy-duty 2500 series vans, which often omitted these fuel-saving features for reliability reasons, the tinkerer sidestepped the issue entirely. The electronics were designed to be robust and forgiving, and that reliability provided the perfect camouflage for hardware fraud. The 24-hour logistics. This wasn't just an engineering problem, it was a time management crisis. To make the math work, the tinkerer had to execute the heist within a single 24-hour rental window. This strict deadline wasn't just about keeping the rental fees under $40, it was about avoiding detection. Modern fleet vehicles are often equipped with passive telematics, GPS systems that track location and idle time. If a rental van sits stationary in a residential driveway for 3 days straight, it might trigger an alert at headquarters. If it vanishes and reappears 24 hours later with reasonable mileage, it stays under the radar. Speed was the ultimate camouflage. The operation required a brutal 4-stage mechanical ballet. This is where the sheer physical exertion comes into play. Most people struggle to change their oil in an afternoon. This individual had to perform 2 complete engine extractions and 2 complete installations in 1 rotation of the Earth. Stage 1, rip the 4.8-liter engine out of his personal truck. Stage 2, extract the high-value 6.0-liter engine from the rental van. Stage 3, drop the prize, the 6.0-liter, into his personal truck. Stage 4, install the decoy, the 4.8-liter, into the rental van and button it up before the sun rose. This brings us to the weapon of choice, the Chevrolet Express cargo van. To the uninitiated, a van looks like a nightmare to work on, but seasoned mechanics know the secret of the doghouse. Unlike a pickup truck, where you have to lean over fenders and fight with a recessed firewall, the cargo van engine sits halfway inside the cabin. You pop the interior engine cover, and suddenly you have incredible access to the back of the motor, the transmission bolts, and the wiring harness. You can practically sit in the passenger seat and unbolt the intake manifold. The vehicle architecture itself facilitated the speed of the theft. The setting was equally critical. This didn't happen in a high-tech chop shop. It happened in a standard suburban garage. Because of the LS platform's standardization, there were no exotic tools required, no proprietary GM extractors, no laser-guided calibration rigs. The entire job could be done with a standard engine hoist, a sturdy engine stand, and a set of professional-grade impact sockets. The barrier to entry was essentially a trip to Harbor Freight and a few gallons of coffee. However, the hurried nature of this timeline introduced the only real risk of physical evidence. When you are rushing to disconnect transmission cooler lines and power steering hoses at 3 a.m., you spill fluids, you leave grease marks. But in the context of a rental work van, a vehicle destined to be abused by contractors, movers, and delivery drivers, a little bit of oil on the crossmember or a smudge on the fender doesn't raise a red flag. It just looks like another day on the job. The tinkerer bet everything on the assumption that the check-in agent would be looking for dents, not checking the torque specs on the motor mounts. And he was right. The blind spot of fleets. The most shocking part of this story is not that the swap happened, but that the industry was completely powerless to detect it. Think about the last time you returned a rental car. You pull into the return lane, and an agent walks out with a handheld scanner. They are looking for three things: a full tank of gas, new dents in the bodywork, and the odometer reading. Their entire training protocol is designed to protect the cosmetic appearance of the vehicle and ensure the fuel bill is paid. The check-in agent does not pop the hood. They do not remove the plastic engine cover. They certainly do not crawl underneath the chassis with a flashlight to verify the casting numbers on the engine block against the vehicle's build sheet. The rental industry operates on high-volume turnover. Speed is money. Detailed mechanical inspections are simply not part of the workflow, because the 4.8-liter engine starts without a struggle and idles without a warning light. It passes the only test that matters to the fleet manager. Does it run? This creates a new category of crime that we call component swirling. In a traditional auto theft, the asset disappears. The loss is immediate and total, but here, the asset remains. The van is still sitting in the parking lot. It still has the correct license plate and the correct VIN tag on the dashboard, but it has suffered massive asset degradation. It is a hollow shell. The fleet believes they own a heavy-duty towing machine capable of hauling 10,000 pounds, but in reality, they own a compromised vehicle that will struggle to pull its own weight up a steep grade. Consider the perspective of the next customer. A contractor rents this van specifically because he needs the torque of the 6.0-liter engine to tow a piece of heavy equipment. He hits the highway, and the van feels gutless. The transmission starts hunting for gears because the engine lacks the power to hold speed in overdrive. He assumes General Motors builds weak trucks, or that the van is just tired. He returns it, complains about the lack of power, and the agency likely just marks it for a basic service check that will never find the root cause because the computer says everything is fine. The systemic failure here is an over-reliance on the chassis VIN as the sole source of truth. For decades, the automotive world has tracked the vehicle based on that little metal plate on the dashboard. If the VIN says it is a 2500 series van with a 6.0-liter V8, the system believes it. The industry tracks the box, but they ignore the jewelry inside. Modern telematics can tell a fleet manager exactly where the van is parked and how fast it is driving, but until recently, they had no mechanism to digitally authenticate the serial numbers of the major powertrain components. The tinkerer understood that if you change the contents but keep the box the same, the inventory system will never know the difference. The war of corporate countermeasures. The aftermath of these heists exposed a gaping hole in the legal framework of automotive property rights. You might assume that catching the tinkerer would result in an immediate prison sentence, But prosecuting component swirling is surprisingly difficult. The legal system relies on the Vehicle Identification Number, or VIN, which is stamped on the dashboard and the chassis. It is not stamped on the engine block in a way that is easily linked in state databases. Unless the rental agency had meticulously logged the specific serial number of the original 6.0-liter engine before the van left the lot, which they almost never did, proving criminal intent becomes a nightmare. A defense attorney could argue that the engine was swapped during a previous repair, or that it was a factory anomaly. Without a paper trail connecting the specific stolen serial number to the chassis, the case often remains circumstantial. But the industry did not take this lying down. The exposure of the swap trick triggered an arms race between fleet managers and thieves. The first response was physical and low-tech. Rental agencies started applying tamper-evident seals, specialized wire tags or breakable decals, to the critical bolts on the bell housing and the motor mounts. If you return a van and those seals are broken, the check-in process stops immediately, and the vehicle goes into forensic hold. It is a simple, visual tripwire designed to make the mechanical labor too risky to attempt. The real revolution, however, was digital. Fleet management companies began integrating advanced intelligence platforms like Vintelligence. Instead of just reading the odometer, the check-in attendant now plugs a scanner into the OBDII port. This tool queries the ECU and cross-references the live data against the original factory build sheet. If the digital profile says the vehicle was born with a high-output 6.0-liter comma, but the real-time fuel trim data suggests the airflow of a 4.8-liter comma, the system flags the discrepancy instantly. This marked the end of the golden age of mechanical arbitrage. On modern vehicles, General Motors and other manufacturers have implemented component protection. The engine control modules, transmission controllers, and body control units are now digitally married to the VIN. If you try to swap a major component without an authorized dealer tool to perform a digital handshake, the vehicle enters a permanent non-start condition or limp mode. The barrier to entry has shifted from having a wrench and a hoist to needing advanced hacking software and encryption keys. The legacy of the tinkerer. So, we reach the end of the legend, and we have to bury the myth once and for all. The $40 diesel swap was never about diesel. It was about the gasoline LS platform, specifically the 4.8-liter and 6.0-liter Vortec Vive 8S. The swap only worked because of the unique shared architecture of these gasoline engines. If the tinkerer had tried this with a Duramax diesel, the mounting points, the electronics, and the transmission bell housing would have fought him every step of the way. The internet likely labeled it a diesel swap because the 6.0-liter provides that diesel-like low-end grunt. But make no mistake, this was a triumph of gasoline engineering. Ultimately, the backyard tinkerer didn't just steal an engine. He exposed the fundamental vulnerability of mass production. He proved that when a corporation prioritizes standardization to save a dollar on the assembly line, they inadvertently hand the keys to anyone with a socket set and a little bit of ambition. He used General Motors' own efficiency against them, capturing the artificial value premium they placed on displacement. Today, that loophole is closed. Modern component protection systems have turned engine swaps into digital warfare, requiring hackers rather than mechanics. But the legacy of the $40 swap remains a masterclass in component arbitrage. It is a reminder that in the automotive world, if you make two things look identical but price them differently, someone will always find a way to trade the cheap one for the expensive one. So, the next time you rent a heavy-duty work van and it feels a little sluggish on the on-ramp, don't just blame the mileage. Pop the hood. Check the casting numbers. You might just be driving the decoy.